Okay, folks, I'm showing you this gleaming tower here. What a view in the sun. What a view. You know, I remember I told you, I said the Rockefellers took over this campus. This is the tallest, this is the tower. This is the Rockefeller Tower. It's the tallest building on campus. It's 216 feet tall. And you know, I said Rockefeller Tower, but they don't call it Rockefeller Tower. See, the Rockefellers always going to mask over their names. They don't want you to know they're around. But actually, it's called the Harkness Tower. Or should I call it the Standard Oil Tower? Harkness, you know, Stephen Harkness, a lot of people don't know this, that Standard Oil, when it was originally formed, found there were 6 members. It wasn't a one-man show. And Stephen Harkness was one of Rockefeller's original partners. And I got to be careful here, people. This is people around here. I don't want to pick up anybody's faces. But this is the tower, the Harkness Tower. But Harkness was a partner with Rockefeller. And, you know, there's a bloody history with Standard Oil. You know, at Colorado, who knows how many people Standard Oil killed over the years. You know, they killed 200 people in Colorado. Of course, there's the Ludlow Massacre where the Rockefellers turned themselves into terrorists. I keep telling you, these people here on this campus are not, they try to shroud their history. They put up these magnificent monuments to their glory so they can kind of like, hopefully people will forget their history. Yeah, we killed a lot of people, but look at this nice tower we put. So we're really not bad people. We're really nice people. But they're not nice people. And what is really to stop them from being criminals? They've never been penalized in every way. They've never been indicted. They've never been disciplined. They've never been rehabilitated. So they could be doing what they've been doing for the last 150 years. But see, when I tell you Standard Oil took over this campus? Exactly. Stephen Harkness was one of the original founders of Standard Oil. All right. And, you know, these people made a lot of money in opium, but oil was a very profitable business. So you can see how the Rockefellers moved in and trumped them. Now you see when I tell you about Skull and Bones, and I talk about Wolf's Head, I talk about Skull and Bones, and I talk about Scroll and Key, these secret societies, how they all came to kill JFK, you could see who's standing over their heads. It's Rockefeller. You might as well call it Rockefeller Tower. Harkness made his money with Rockefeller. Now, Skull and Bones, their tomb is really, I'm going to say maybe 500 feet. I'm going to go show it to you. And the statue of Abraham Pearson is in the shadow of that tower. And Abraham Pearson, 4 members, if not 5 members of his family were called out and Warren Commission documents under suspicion they conspired to kill JFK. Of course, nobody was punished except for Oswald. Of course, they executed him. And of course, Clay Shaw was indicted. I will say he was acquitted, but that doesn't mean he wasn't guilty. And David Ferrie, of course, he was indicted, and he was found dead the next day. But the people who really gave the orders, they paid no penalty. They paid Standard Oil, built with Standard Oil money. Say, I told you, this campus is Rockefeller Yale University. I'm standing where, and this is where I wanted to come for. I found out, well, let me back up first. Now, here it is. Here's the man. Here's the man who founded this university in 1701. And his name is Abraham Pearson. And actually, the original campus wasn't here, but he did found the university. He was a co-founder. I'm going to tell you co-founder. And I'm trying not to pick up any human beings here, unless they're in bronze. There it is. Abraham Pearson. Primus, whatever that means. Caligo ELNC President. There's the year. Don't even ask me to translate that. I imagine it's just the College of Yale. President of college here. First president of college. Yeah, that's it. First president. I don't know what language is early English. This is why I came here. To show you this statue. How's that? We'll just look at his silhouette here. Basically, I'm under some trees here. It's actually a beautiful day for photography. But what I learned is his descendants, at least four, were mentioned in Warren Commission documents. And when I learned, I saw those names for years, and I never really gave them much. Just the name in the Warren Commission Act, along with thousands of other names. And you're going to wonder, and you want to wonder. And then I realized that they are descended from this man who's the founder of Yale University. Well, if you read my books, Clash of Dynasty, I tie in, who do I tie in? Skull and Bones. Like Henry Luce, George Bush, 41, who was photographed in Dealey Plaza, and Edward Hooker. I talk about those guys. They're all real Yaleys, but they're ancient old families. But you see, if I hold this camera up, I'm not even going to change my footing. You see kind of almost something out there. You see it? I'm not even going to change my footing, but you'll see it. That's the Rockefeller Tower. See, so who's giving orders here? Rockefeller. That's how they came to kill Kennedy. It's really not called the Rockefeller Tower because the Rockefellers like to mask out their names. It's really called the Harkness Tower. Now, Harkness was one of the original co-founders of Standard Oil with Rockefeller. People forget there were 6 co-founders, and they all became super rich, and their names are plastered all over this campus, along with the Whitneys. All right, there's various branches of the Whitneys, though. Some were involved in killing JFK, others were not. The ones that relate to the Standard Oil co-founder, Colonel Oliver Payne, are. All right, now, here are the names. Here are the Pearson names mentioned in War Commission documents. Dorothy Pearson, blood descendant. Nancy Pearson, blood descendant. Cornelia Skinner Pearson, married into the family. Married Abraham Pearson Roman. It's spelled Romeyn or I-N. I don't even know if I pronounced it right, but he was found dead in his Palm Beach home under a suspicious thing. He was found dead laying on the floor in his Palm Beach home, and his wife became an immediate suspect. And then within days, she took off, went to Italy, married a count. She became Countess Cantaglia. So in the War Commission documents, you'll see her name as Countess Cantaglia. But she was married to Abraham Pearson Romney, who was found dead. Now, Dorothy Pearson is her daughter. Dorothy Pearson and Abraham Pearson Roman were the parents of Dorothy Pearson. So they're direct descendants of this man. Direct descendants. Now, there's one more blood relative whose name is mentioned in Warren Commission documents. Now, this girl was embroiled in killing JFK, whether she knew it or not. Okay, and her name is, as per Warren Commission documents, Alexandria de Morenchides. That would throw you off. Basically, you had these an elite Protestant married a Russian Catholic. Yeah, Miss Pearson would have been spinning in his grave if he knew that. These people were super bigoted. That's why they came here, because they hated Catholics, let alone Eastern Rites Catholics. Yeah, but her full name is Alexandria Pearson, and she was embroiled in killing JFK. I don't know about the other family members, how involved they were in killing JFK, but she was principally involved in killing JFK because she was providing, I'm not exaggerating here, folks, it's in Warren Commission documents. She was involved in supplying aid and comfort to Lee Oswald and his wife, Marina, and children in as close as a few months before JFK was assassinated, and providing him with transportation, providing him with money, providing him with safe houses, providing him with a lot. I got a tour going on around here, but I don't want to put people in my camera here. All right. And so get back to Alexandria. Yeah, well, she's Russian. Part Russian, part elite Protestant. Oh, Connecticut Yankees. I mean, yeah, these are Connecticut Yankees. You know, Mark Twain wrote a book about it. Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. Well, this was a Connecticut Yankee. Now, so she was providing aid and comfort as per Warren Commission documents. That's why I'm not making any of this stuff up. And I'm going to be publishing a lot of this in my book, my new book. I'm writing a 1,000-page book. I wrote the book Clash of Dynasty, published in 2007. It gives you a lot of. I didn't know about this connection to this guy. I didn't know that. Okay, now I know. That's why I came to Yale. And what do I see plastered all over here? Rockefeller. Well, there's the Rockefeller Tower. Look at right down on poor Abraham. Looking right down on him. Well, they sold out. There was no difference. Totally corrupted the big money. No difference. Just like James Pierpont, whose relatives were involved in killing JFK. I'm going to talk about that. We're going to go to the Pierpont house. Their names are mentioned in the Warren Commission documents as well. He sold out to Elihu Yale, the big opium lord, selling opium to China, smuggling opium to China, and poisoning half the country. Now China's smuggling opium into this country, and this campus is internally is really becoming increasingly Asian in nature. Well, this is what they did. China's smuggling opium, fentanyl in this country, poison in this country, and these ancestors here, they poisoned China with their opium. And Eli and Pierpont, whose kids are mentioned, and are married to Rockefeller. The Pierponts are married to Rockefellers, by the way, and the J.P. Morgan. The Pierponts were poisoning China. Then he sold out to Elihu Yale, the namesake of this university. Elihu Yale was the director of the British East India Company run by the King of England. Well, this campus was run by the King of England one time. I'm going to show you the statue of Nathaniel Hale right behind me. This is the oldest part of the school. Okay, now I want to tell you how. I'm going to bring in another name. There was a man named George Marinchy. So let's call him a Russian birth. Emigrated to the United States. He married Dorothy Pearson, who was an heiress to a New Jersey-based fortune. Okay, the Pearsons own a city, Manalapan in New Jersey, and they own 12 miles of pristine ocean front. Not pristine anymore. I'm going to tell you a story too, but I'm not going to do it here. I'm going to go to the other side of the Pearson College, and I'm going to tell you the story how this family ties to Michael Payne, who provided Oswald a safe house on the eve of the Kennedy assassination. Kind of losing track of my thoughts here, but going back to George Marinchy, now he's a Russian emigre. His name is plastered all over Warren Commission documents, but he was Oswald's closest associate in the months and days leading up to the JFK assassination, although he skipped town like 2 weeks before Kennedy was shot. Well, that's suspicious in itself. He went down into Hades, but that's another story, some of which I'm going to be covering, have covered, and will be covering more. I cover some of it in the book Clash of Dynasties. Before that, I wrote Rockefellerocracy. I've been doing this for 40 years. That's why I know so much. You know, folks, don't pay a lot of attention to that dog and pony show going down in Washington about declassified documents. Although they do have some value, but in the wrong hands, they could be only deepen the mystery. If I had those documents, I would know. I know what's legit and what isn't. Because you know why? I look at everything with an eye to Rockefeller. Well, see, here it is, Rockefeller Tower. So, what am I making up here? And Skull and Bones, of course, is like maybe just down, like a block down to the left there. Their tomb, Skull and Bones tomb. Whew, wow, this tour has turned out to be enormous. I was hoping, trying to get people on this camera, so I'm going to try to move the camera a little bit. Yeah, well, he married Dorothy Pearson. They met in 1943. They got pregnant, they got married, they got divorced, and the family actually, they produced a daughter. The daughter's name was Alexandria de Marinchy. Alexandria Pearson de Marinchy. Yeah, see, that's how it ties. See, and they got divorced. Actually, the family broke them up. If you read their family, they broke her aunt, the aunt, Nancy Pearson, and I think even the Countess. They didn't want those two. They didn't like. They badmouthed her. They called George a homosexual. They called Dorothy a slut. Well, they didn't say slut, but they said she was dating random servicemen. Well, that's translates as you know. They did everything to take that child. They took Alexandria, and they took that baby. They took Alexandria. And 14 years later, Dorothy filed a lawsuit in Palm Beach. I got the court records. They're part of Warren Commission documents. And she tried, for 14 years, she never saw that girl. The aunt had her. The aunt hit her. And I don't know what happened after that. But you do the math. So 14 years later, okay, she's 14. 6 years later, her name pops up in the Kennedy assassination story as conspiring to kill JFK. I'm not making any of this stuff up, folks. I don't know if George, let's face it, he was a stranger. They hated George more than they hated their own daughter. Now, why would they do this? Why would they basically take this girl? It's the same story as the Vanderbilts, the little Gloria Vanderbilt, which they have their building right over to the left of me is the Vanderbilt Hall. It was the same thing. They took little Gloria from her natural parents, her natural mother. They called her a slut. And, basically, you know what I'm saying, in a roundabout way. Okay? They called her a slut. And that's what they do. They declare them unfit to raise children. But why do they want these children? I'm going to tell you why. They're heirs to massive fortunes. See, all these old dynasties, they put their money in trusts, and it was children and grandchildren who were heirs to these trusts, who ruled over these trusts, who were beneficiaries of these trusts. These aren't just orphan kids going to be left at some foster doorstep. These are just like the king. The baby is born a king. That's a king. The baby's going to inherit an empire. These people were like baby kings. They were going to inherit fortunes and American wealth and money. That's why they took the girl. Because they wanted to control all that money that she inherited. Dorothy Pearson was an heiress to a fortune, New Jersey-based fortune. So her daughter, by bloodline, would be an heir to all that money. And her husband, I told you, the father, Dorothy's husband, was found dead. Well, Alexandria's father was found dead in his room. And Cornelius Skinner Pearson, she was a person of interest. Well, okay, that's routine when a husband dies. So George Marinsky was associating with Oswald in the years and days. I mean, within a year and months and weeks of the Kennedy assassination, as well documented in Warren Commission documents, as well documented. And Alexandria was her daughter. Now, somehow they grew up. She was estranged from her biological parents, but somehow there must have been a reuniting of father and daughter. Because next thing you know, she's providing aid and comfort to the Oswalds. Transportation, money, housing, who knows what else. See, so she was preparing Oswald for the JFK assassination. Whether she knew it or not, she's still part of the conspiracy. Was that by chance? No, not by chance. It's by plot. And of course, this was all ordered by the Rockefellers. See, there they are. You look at this little puny statue. There's the Rockefeller statue. I'm not going to move, but I'm going to show you. I want to go to the Pierpont home, only because the Pierponts also, the descendants, were part of the JFK assassination. And I'm going to show you that. Then I'm going to take you over to Pearson College, and I'm going to explain a story how Michael Payne, who provided Oswald with a safe house on the eve of the Kennedy assassination, the Paynes also were providing aid and comfort, and how they tied to this man in the history of America, in the history of Connecticut, how they tied to this man. And they tied to the Declaration of Independence. And I'm not going to say they were blood relatives, but they were bonded in American history. And I'm going to explain it to you. So, okay. So I'm going to just show you Nathaniel Hale statue, and then we're going to go to the Pierpont home. Now here is one of the original. This was the original dormitory for the college. All right, and who stayed here? Nathaniel Hale. And I'm trying to show you this stuff without picking up people. They took them down. People can't do. I'm going to show you this here. What I was trying to say was people have a difficult time dealing with reality, and if I say certain things, see here it is, Connecticut. Oh well, this is Connecticut Valley. Right here, here's the plaque. This hall was the room of Nathaniel Hale, the class of 1773. Of course, he was hung by the British. Now, the British ran this campus at one time. And here's another building. Don't ask me what it is. I'm trying to hold the camera up. I don't really want people on my camera. So there's the statue. I gotta aim it up, but that's Nathaniel Hale right there. But there it is. I regret that I only have one life to give to my country. All right, but here's the thing. He didn't look anything like that. That was actually the woman who did the sculpture hired a model. But anyway, the CIA has this statue, or copy of it, in Langley, Virginia. You know why? This guy was a spy, or he was hung by the British king and allegations that he spied. Well, that all fits into the history of this campus. So, look at Skull and Bones. They were probably spies too. So it kind of fits into the history. So yeah, this statue, I don't know if it's an exact copy or another, but he didn't look like this. No, but there is no pictures of Nathaniel Hale that survive. No. Hi folks, I'm here in front of what was the home of James Pierpont, and he was one of the co-founders along with Abraham Pearson of this Yale University. Big history with the Whitneys. New Haven and Hartford have a huge history with the Whitney family, but the branch that I talk about Collins Whitney. They're a branch of the family, but they're a whole different breed, believe me. John Hay Whitney, who killed JFK, I believe, and his father Payne Whitney and Uncle Harry Whitney and Collins Whitney. They're a whole different breed they're related to the Greater Whitney dynasty, which is 400 years old. There's Whitney names plastered all over the state of Connecticut. But James Pierpont, Reverend James Pierpont, mother was a hooker. See, now the hooker name pops up in the Kennedy assassination story. This building today is actually the visitor center for Yale. And like I said, Hooker Pierpont, there's a little museum in there. Some of the history of the college. But the hookers, see, first of all, the Rockefellers buried Hooker. John Rockefeller III married Blanchett Ferry Hooker Rockefeller, and she was an heir to multiple fortunes. The Ferry fortune, that was big. They were big in agriculture. The dynasties were marrying dynasties. But George Marincci, the Hooker name is mentioned in Warren Commission documents. Edward Gordon Hooker. He was George Marinci's business partner in the 50s. They were some kind of oil business. Who knows what kind of shady things they were involved in. They had their headquarters on the corner of, their New York City headquarters was on the corner of 57 and 5th Avenue across from the Vanderbilts and the Whitneys. Well, the Whitneys lived right across the street. The Whitneys I'm talking about and the Vanderbilts lived right across the street. But when George was there, those mansions were demolished. But they still owned the air rights, and they put up a lot of office buildings and co-ops and business stores and things like that. They owned all that whole neighborhood. Although the mansions were gone, those families, the Vanderbilts and the Whitneys, they were very present, very much part of that. And George was living right in the middle of it. But George Marinci's business partner was Ed Hooker, who was George Bush's best friend. Now, they were skull and bones. And George Bush was photographed in Dealey Plaza with his preppy New England clothes on. I'm sure he was sent there to represent the Skull and Bones participating in killing JFK. Of course, they say it wasn't him, and it looks dead ringer for him, but You know, they're going to deny the obvious. Certain people are above the law. If you're a Yale, I guess you're above the law. If you're Skull and Bones, you're way above the law. Yeah, the hooker. No, Pierpont was a hooker. Now, Bush, Prescott Bush, was what? The senator of Connecticut. He was a Connecticut senator. See, they were Skull and Bones. Prescott was Skull and Bones. George Herbert Walker Bush, or sometimes refer to him as Bush 41, was the Skull and Bones, and so wasn't his son, Bush 43. They were Skull and Bones, and of course, Ed Hooker was best friends with George Bush. And George Bush was the best man at his wedding. I think he even gave the bride away. How do I know that? It was in the New York Times. Their wedding was covered in, Ed Hooker's wedding was covered in the New York Times. Now, George Marincki, they're not only business partners, but George Marincki's brother married Ed Hooker's mother. Yeah. George Marincki's brother, Dmitri, who worked for the OSS during World War II, but George Marincki's brother, Dmitri, lived to be 100, married Ed Hooker's mother. She had a long name, too. She was married multiple times to rich people. I think it was Betty, Cartwright, Houlihan, Hooker, DeMarincki, as per Warren Commission documents. How you doing? So all these names pop up as the Warren Commission documents. Of course, they're going to say, oh, it's just all coincidental. Hey, everything's a coincidence, except for Oswald. Everybody's a coincidence but Oswald. Yes, that's what these elite do. They find innocent people and they paint them up as guilty, and then they walk away laughing. That's what these criminals do. Well, Pierpont, J.P. Morgan was a Pierpont, which means he was a hooker. You know, J.P. Morgan, the financial titan. And also a partner with John Rockefeller. I could get into the history of the collapse of the Knickerbocker Trust, but I don't think I'm going to, which was run by the Whitneys. I don't think I'm going to get into it now. It's just too much to cover, but it's in my books. And that was the birth of the Federal Reserve banking ripoff. I'm going to try all my effort. I'm going to use every effort in my bone not to get off. I'm really not off. I don't want to get too far from this Pierpont story. So I told you, the hooker married a Rockefeller. J.P. Morgan was a hooker. And Edward Hooker, of course, he was a hooker. He went by the name Edward Gordon Hooker. There's a Gordon name here. I seen the Gordon name here on this campus. And his father was Mather Hooker. I can see the Mather name. See, all these names were old dynastic families. See, that's why they carry their names. Often, like FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, those are all last names, surnames for wealthy dynastic and opium smuggling families. So they poisoned China with their opium, but they want to deny it. Well, the King of England was the biggest opium pusher in the world. The Dutch East India Company. The British East. Well, maybe the Dutch too. They were all related to King of England, anyways. But the British East India Company they were privateers. You know, they were going out and smuggling opium and trading slaves. These are not nice people. See, and then they made a fortune in opium, and the Reverend James Pierpont turned the campus over to Elihu. Maybe I'll just say Eli Yale. So this campus is named after an opium lord, and they don't want you to know that. See, they want to erase that history. That's why they put up all these memorials to make you think they glorify their names, and they're not. I know their past. That's why they hate me. They want to erase their past. But I keep regurgitating. And there's no reason these people have changed. There's been nothing to rehabilitate these people. They've never been punished. They've never been called out. Barely called out. And if you call them out, you get trampled. You know, if you speak the truth, the truth can hurt a lot of people. And people are trying to hide their past. But then again, Ed Hooker was George Bush's best friend, and George Bush was photographed in Dealey Plaza, and then he became director of the CIA during the time of Watergate. So they say, the CIA killed Kennedy. Well, who was running the CIA? The Bush family? Also, there was another name in the CIA too. His name was Tracy Barnes. He was head of the Division of Plans for the Western Hemisphere during the Bay of Pigs invasion. Howard Hunt worked for him. Howard Hunt, Watergate guy. I told you who ordered Watergate was Rockefeller's. He's a Whitney too. Tracy Barnes is a Whitney. They're related. Like second cousins to John Hay Whitney, who I call out as being one of the people who killed JFK. I can't get into all that now. You got to read my book because it's a big story. So yeah, John Hay Whitney, yeah. Yeah, the Knickerbocker Bank was run by the Whitneys. See, because Charles Tracy Barney married a Whitney. He married Colin Whitney's sister. And Colin Whitney married Colonel Oliver Payne's sister. Oliver Payne was one of the original co-founders of Standard Oil. So that's why they put up these massive buildings like Payne Whitney Gym, 11 stories. These are just monuments to glorify, to cover up their crimes. And this is what the Rockefellers did with the Rockefeller Ripoff Foundation and the Ford Foundation. Of course, William Clayton Ford was part of Wilsad, Henry Ford's grandson, one of their big three secret societies. And yeah, this is what these people did. They glorified themselves with these gifts, but I don't believe they're gifting anybody. But I want to talk about another guy, Silliman. There's a Silliman College here, and his tie to the history of Standard Oil and petroleum. It's a major factor. I'm not going to say he was involved in killing JFK. You know, Yale had a massive research. They were doing all kinds of cutting edge research here, most of which is secret. I want to get over to the Dr. Harvey Cushing and the John Hay Whitney Medical Records campus over here, and try to show you that. And it ties to Oswald, it ties to MK Ultra, it ties to the Kennedy assassination. Goes on and on and on, these families. But it's a massive story. Okay, so I came here to tell you, Pierpont descendant Edward Gordon Hooker was mentioned in Warren Commission documents as business partner to George Barenchis, and George Barenchis was Oswald's closest associate in providing with all kinds of stuff. Although in their testimonies they try to they're very forgetful of dates and times, and they go into, this is all part of their shtick. They go into, their forgetfulness and denialship. And that's what they do. And then, Oswald wanted attention. That word attention actually came from George Barenchis' testimony. And not in regards to him killing JFK, but he's just saying, well, I can't get into it all now. Read my book, Clash of Dynasties. I got a new one coming out. Not right away, though. You don't want to wait for the new one. It's going to be 1,000 pages of truth. Don't get too caught up in this dog and pony show in Washington about declassified documents. That's just one more. How many times do you want to be lied to by the government? You got the Warren Commission cover-up. You got the House Assassination Committee cover-up. You got the Church Committee cover-up. Now you got this thing going on now, declassified documents covered up. I'm going to try to scoot over to Silliman College and the John Hay. I'm going to show you the headquarters, the tomb of Scroll and Key, John Hay Whitney's place. Okay, see you in a few. All right, here's Harkness Hall. Here's the building here. I'm trying to stay out of the sun. This is part of the building. This might be part of the new section of the building. But here's what I wanted to show you. I'm going to pan my camera, and you're going to see this building here. All right, it's the tomb. It's a tomb. See, and I'm going to try to give you show you the front view of this building. But it's actually what they call the tomb, because this was the home of Scroll and Key. Yale has a dozen secret societies. The big three were Skull and Bones, Wolf's Head, and this Scroll and Key. But they tell me, the rumor is the Scroll and Key were wealthier. This is a Moorish building. It's covered over. I'm going to try to get around to the front and show it to you. Now, who belonged to this? It was John Hay Whitney, who I connected to the JFK assassination. Okay, now his grandfather and uncles, Payne Whitney. Now, Payne Whitney built the Payne Whitney Gym. The biggest gym in the world with 11 stories. Well, I guess the Whitneys do things in a big way. So, I'm going to try to get you around here. I don't like to walk with the camera, but if you want the truth, you got to take a little pain. And this is the front of the building. We're going to come around the front of the building here. This is Scrolling Key. There it is. Oh, here it is. This is the front of Scrolling Key. This is their tomb. Some people think the tomb only applies to Skull and Bones, but they don't. Any of these secret societies, wherever they meet, they call them tombs because they look like tombs. Well, you know, if you've got a secret society, you don't want windows where people can look in, you know, peep around curtains and listen in, and so you have to seal it off. See, look at that iron door. Look at this. Look at that. Look at those. This is so much better than Skull and Bones. Look at those marble posts. Look at that. See, everything is sealed off because they're secret. They don't want you to know what's going on. Look at that door. That's probably brass, really. Bronze. These people had money, big time. And they're considered the wealthiest society here. The Order of Scrolling Key. Now, Scrolling Key, from what I understand, was a splinter group. Now, John Hay Whitney was Scrolling Key, while his father, uncle, and grandfather were Skull and Bones. But there was a split there. There was a split. Scrolling Key members split off from Skull and Bones. Maybe because Skull and Bones wasn't radical enough for them. I mean radical, I should say ruthless enough. See, there's the side of the building. That's something? Moorish design. No windows. Well, they don't want windows. They're a secret society. They don't want anybody eavesdropping on them. This is just pan the neighborhood here a little bit. Just kind of pan the neighborhood. The sun's coming out here. So I'm going to go to Silliman College. Okay, folks, I'm here on the back side. I believe this is the back side. They call this building the Schwartzman Building. Mr. Schwartzman has a Jewish history, but you know, he was Skull and Bones, but he came in, you know, many years later. I mean, I'm sure, you know, the Pearsons and the Pierponts and the hookers would have been turning over the grave before they would let any Jewish into their org. You know, they were real racist. You know, you had to be a Christian elite families to belong to those things, and Protestant elites, or they wouldn't let you in. They were the most racist people, bigoted people. I'm trying to get this guy, but that's the back of the building. Now Schwartzman now, of course, the New York City Library, main branch of the library, which has a history with the Astors, has a history of many families in New York City, including the Rockefellers. But Schwartzman, that's the main branch, is called the Schwartzman Building. And Schwartzman moved into 740 Park, which is New York City's one of their most elite addresses on Park Avenue. Interesting, George Marinchy lived across the street at the corner of Park and 73rd. Back in the day, say 1941, before the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, according to Warren Commission documents. But he moved into John Rockefeller. When John Rockefeller died, well, Schwartzman moved into what was John Rockefeller's 26-room co-op at 740 Park, which was a penthouse co-op. It's 26 rooms. Schwartzman moved in. Of course, Rockefeller probably was gone many years. And his partner, his business partner, well, they were involved with Lehman Brothers, which kind of went down the porcelain tube. But his partner, Peter G. Peterson, moved in. All right, folks, I'm standing here in the front of Stephen Schwarzman Center. I showed you the back of this building. All right, so Stephen Schwarzman, he didn't build this building, but he donated a lot of ka-ching to the university, and they slapped his name on the front of the building. But now he ties to the Rockefellers. Okay, he ties to the Rockefellers through Lehman Brothers. Lehman Brothers, of course, you know they had a history with the forming of they had Paul Warburg. They had a history with the forming of Federal Reserve Bank, which was formed by the Rockefellers, pretty much handled through Nelson Rockefeller's maternal grandfather, Nelson Eldridge. So he was with Lehman Brothers. So Lehman Brothers, of course, they kind of disappeared. Bad management, bad financial management, and then here they are, they put their names on buildings. So they raid people, make a lot of money, build shrines to themselves. So they make themselves and the Rockefellers richer, because Lehman Brothers was in Rockefeller Center. All the tenants in Rockefeller Center, according to David Rockefeller's memoirs, he said had a close identification with his father. So his partner in Lehman Brothers, Peter G. Peterson. Now, Schwartzman moved into John Rockefeller's former co-op at 740 Park, which was one time was the richest address in Manhattan. And he took over. Rockefeller lived there. Was it John Rockefeller II? Nelson's father lived there in a 26-room co-op. And Schwartzman moved in after Rockefeller died. And George Morenci, according to Warren Commission documents, lived on a corner of Park and 73rd, which is just basically diagonally across the street, because 740 is at 71. He was at 73. So basically, he could wave to the Rockefeller neighbors coming and going. If you look at George Morenci's addresses, they're always across the street from Rockefeller's. Is that another coincidence? Or they're in the shadows of Rockefeller Center. But I want to mention Peter G. Peterson on the same breath with Schwartz, because Peter G. Peterson, they were partners. Some kind of a scam going, made a lot of money ripping people off. I'm going to say something about Schwartzman. This guy had Jewish ancestry. He's skull and bones. You go back in the days of Pearson and Pierpont, man, these people were racist. They didn't want any Jews anywhere near their campuses or fraternal organizations. Things have changed, and probably for the better in some ways. But Peter G. Peterson, of course, he founded what was called the Peterson Commission, which was really founded by John Rockefeller III and C. Douglas Dillon. And, of course, C. Douglas Dillon was a Rockefeller Foundation director and trustee. And John Rockefeller III was chairman. And C. Douglas Dillon was Secretary of Treasury for JFK. All right, so now they formed the Peterson Commission, because what happened, Nelson Rockefeller got caught taking money from his family foundation to finance his political campaigns for White House, for the presidency, and for gubernatorial campaigns. Now, he ran in 64, and he announced his candidacy November 9th of 1963, 13 days before JFK was assassinated. So that makes him a person of interest, because he had an apparent motive, and he was the leading candidate. And JFK confided in the people that he believed Nelson Rockefeller was going to be his biggest challenge to re-election. And Rockefeller lasted until the third night of the Republican convention. He was beat out by the right wing of his party, led by Barry Goldwater. Nelson Rockefeller was way too progressive for these folks. So, anyways, Peter G. Peterson, Nelson's grandfather set up the Federal Reserve Bank in 1913. They set up the, I'm sorry if I don't get this right. Was it the 16th Amendment? Something like that. I apologize if I got it wrong, but you can Google it. But it imposed income tax unconstitutionally on American people to finance the Federal Reserve banking ripoff. So in other words, if your bank goes under, the taxpayers got to pay it out. As long as you're part of the Federal Reserve System, the taxpayers got to pay it off. That's kind of what that was about. And it followed collapse of the Knickerbocker Bank. Well, actually, it wasn't even a bank. It was a trust, which was also run by who? The Whitney family. I mean, I'm talking about the big Whitneys, the big Whitneys, who were heirs of Standard Oil. Always ties to the Rockefeller. Everything ties to the Rockefellers. But it collapsed. Now, you might know the name Tracy Barnes. He's a Whitney, He was the head of the Western, for the CIA. He was head of plans for the Western Hemisphere, which included the Bay of Pigs. His subordinate was E. Howard Hunt, Watergate burglar. And I believe he was part of the hit squad. I believe Howard Hunt led the hit squad that killed JFK. But Tracy Barnes is a Whitney. He's second cousin to John Hay Whitney. You know, it goes back to the Knickerbocker Bank because Charles Tracy Barney married Collins Whitney's sister, and Colin Whitney married Flora Payne, who was a Standard Oil Oliver Payne was a Standard Oil co-founder. You see, it all ties into Standard. Always ties to the Rockefeller. So here's one of the biggest buildings on Yale, Stephen Schwarzman Building, Skull and Bones, Jewish Skull and Bones. Things have changed. And he was a big shot, him and Peterson, with Lehman Brothers, which is headquartered in Rockefeller Center. So they send their companies bankrupt, but they don't go bankrupt. See, they run off at all the profits and build monuments to themselves. All right, well, I told you about the Peterson Commission. Peterson moved into after Nelson Rockefeller died. Peterson moved into Rockefeller's penthouse at 812 Fifth Avenue on the corner of 62nd Street. And a lot of connections. George Brinchie, everywhere he lived, was always across from a Rockefeller. As per Warren Commission documents, I'm not pulling this stuff out of thin air. But I'm going to move on. I'm going to show you some more things. I want to show you Silliman College. Okay, folks. Got a few more sites we got to stop. Okay, I'm here at Silliman College, which is part of Yale. And Silliman has a big history with the petroleum industry. And in kind of ways, he touched it off. This is the college here. Part of it goes way in. It's quite large. It's part of Yale. And just show you the neighborhood a little bit. This is the Stephen Schwarzman Center, which I showed you. I was across the street a minute ago. But the reason I wanted to bring you here was because of Silliman. Was when crude oil came out of the ground, when it first was bubbling up, there was places that were seeping up into the surface. And, in Oil City, was seeping up into the surface. It wasn't very useful because if you burned it, it put up a real black sooty smoke. It was barely used. Maybe to light bonfires or something. Actually, it was more used as an internal medicine for medicinal purposes. And John Rockefeller's father, William Rockefeller, actually was in business with I believe his name is Bissell. They were selling petroleum for medicinal reasons. And there's a history there with the Rockefellers too. But it was Silliman. You know, this Yale University had a huge history of research. And Silliman was the guy who determined that you could take crude petroleum and refine it through a process of distillation, and it would be it would burn super clean to a simple process of just very similar to how, you know, they make alcohol distillation process. And that's what touched off the oil boom. When that was discovered right here on this campus, it touched off the oil boom. And if you know, Colonel Drake, who drilled the first oil well, right there, that's the tomb of Scroll and Key. So it's right across from Silliman. And I'm having trouble with focus. I don't know if I'm just getting sun bleached or what the story is, but I'll talk to you just a little here about Silliman and Colonel Drake, who was not really a colonel. But yeah, Silliman was the one who learned right here on this campus that if you distill crude oil, you can refine it, and it makes it very clean burning. And of course, back in the day, it was all about kerosene. They were using petroleum to basically light as an illuminant. This is before the internal combustion engine and all that, before the use of gasoline. So this probably went in probably 1850s, 50 something. Well, touched off the oil boom, touched off a gold rush. Actually, the biggest gold rush in human history. And it was actually about 50 miles north of here. Colonel Drake was financed by some wealthy men. I can't think of the list of them, but from Hartford, Connecticut, which is 50 miles north of here, which today is the capital of the insurance industry. And these old families, these old Protestant families, they're all intertwined. They're all intermarried. They're all intertwined in religion and schools and colleges and corporations. Hartford, Connecticut, all these cities have a huge history with the Whitney family and some of these other families, Pierponts, this Connecticut Valley. Hookers, Pierponts. Any of these names, if you research these prominent names, if you go into their family history, you'll see they married in with Hookers, they married in Pierponts, they married in with Woolsleys, they married in with the Cobbetts, they married in with the Gardners, they married in all these old wealthy dynasties. Of course, Connecticut Valley was more the Pierponts and the Hookers and the Whitneys. So yeah, there's a big history here with petroleum. This is and of course John Rockefeller was in the fledgling days of oil because he ran a business in Cleveland that sold oil it came out of the Pennsylvania oil fields. So I wanted to tell you this little bit here about these Connecticut Valley dynasties and how it ties to Silliman College and the greater history of petroleum. Folks, I was going by this building. I bumped into this building here. It looks like it's made out of either marble or granite, but you see it has no windows. So what does that tell you? It's a tomb. A tomb. Now, there's a cemetery behind me, but don't confuse it with that. They call it tombs because they have no doors or windows. So they look like tombs. And it does look like a tomb. But the reason they call it a tomb because it's a secret society. It's a secret society of, is it Book and Snake? Yeah, it's Yale's oldest secret society. There's like a dozen secret societies here. It's called the Tomb, 1863. Well, I don't know if that's older than Skull and Bones. It's old. But who belonged here? One of its most famous members was John Verneau Bouvier III, Jacqueline Kennedy's father. So I had to stop for this one. I just want to look and see that. I think it's all, and there's some sculpture there too. I don't know if that's connected with it. It could be. I don't know, the massive history and all this stuff around here. But I had to show you to this one. Book and Snake, one of 12 secret societies of Yale. All right, this is the Payne Whitney Gymnasium. It's 9 stories tall. I am going to walk in there, but I won't put my camera on. Don't ask me what year this was built, but Payne Whitney, is Skull and Bones, as was his grandfather. I mean, his father, Collins Whitney, they were Skull and Bones. But I believe Payne Whitney's son, John Hay Whitney, conspired with Nelson Rockefeller to kill JFK. Now, you got to read my book to get into all that history. But now, John Hay Whitney was scrolling key. He didn't follow his father's footsteps as far as fraternal affiliation. But it's 9 stories tall. Biggest gymnasium in the world. But they were very athletic, John Hay Whitney was on the cover of Time magazine. He was a championship polo player. Well, both plays polo, very rich people like kings. And they also had thoroughbred racehorses. Well, they're huge in thoroughbred racehorsing. But they're related to, they're heirs to Standard Oil fortunes, because Standard Oil co-founder Colonel Oliver Payne, had no children, had no wife, and he inherited all his money. Went to his brother. Collins Whitney actually was Colonel Oliver Payne's brother-in-law. Payne came here to school and he became from Collins Whitney, and they became best buds. And then Payne struck it big in oil, investing with John Rockefeller, and then we passed. All went to Collins, and it went to Payne, and it went to Harry, and it went to the grand nieces and nephews. This branch of the family. Now, Whitney family is huge. It goes back 4 centuries, but the branch of the family that had the big money they were the big Whitneys. Were the ones who were descended from Collins Whitney. And I told you about Tracy Barnes, who was with the CIA. He's a Whitney too. And also John Hay Whitney was mentioned in it's news. President Kennedy called out John Hay Whitney's newspaper in a secret society speech that he gave in 1962 in a Waldorf Astoria. He called out John Hay Whitney owned the Herald Tribune, and he called out secret societies like Herald Tribune. He mentioned in the newspaper, and Herald Tribune was mentioned in Warren Commission documents. Yeah, they pop up in Warren Commission documents, but it's only coincidental. Everything's a coincidence about Oswald. Everything else is just a coincidence. I'm going to take a walk in there if I can, if they let me in. I won't use my camera in there, and then we're going to go. I want to go to Pearson College and talk about how Michael Payne ties all this. Okay, folks. Hi, folks. I'm here at Pearson College, which is part of the campus of Yale University. I don't know if you can read that. It says Pearson Gateway. It's the Pearson Gate to the Pearson College, but you got to have a pass to go in there. There's some of it in the background. I don't know all about it. You can get to it on the other side, too. But the reason I came here is standing here in front of the Pearson Gate. And I want to talk a little bit about how Abraham Pearson ties this university and Abraham Pearson, who was a co-founder of this university. I've been doing several videos here. If you listen to my videos, you understand it, that his family members, Pearson family members, were embroiled in the JFK assassination controversy by their names appearing in Warren Commission documents. Dorothy Pearson, Nancy Pearson, Alexandria Pearson de Marincides, and Countess Cantagallia. I gotta always think on that one. And she was a Pearson by marriage. She was Cornelia Skinner Pearson. Then when her husband died under suspicious circumstances, of course she was an immediate person of interest. She took off to Italy and married an Italian count. Dorothy was her daughter, and Nancy was a sister to her husband. Her husband was Abraham Pearson Roman. Romeyn. I'm not sure how it's pronounced. I'm going to pronounce it Roman. He died. They were heirs. Dorothy Pearson was an heir to a New Jersey-based fortune. They owned the Pearsons owned the town of Manalapan. And they had a big estate in Palm Beach called Manalapan. Okay, now, I want to show how this ties to New Jersey, and it ties to Michael Payne and Ruth Payne. Now, that name is spelled P-A-I-N-E, not to be confused with P-A-Y-N-E, which is the Oliver Payne and Payne Whitney. That's a different. They're not related, at least not in any meaningful way. But if you go back into history, I'm talking 1630s. Abraham Pearson, the elder, Reverend Abraham Pearson, had an issue. A lot of these they came in here with these early settlers in the Connecticut River Valley, and there was a schism there, and they basically branched off. They filled up a boat, called it an ark, and they set sail. Now, along with him was a man named Robert Treat, a reverend, and they banded together, Robert Treat and Abraham Pearson, the elder, banded together to create a schism. They created a splinter group, and they went someplace further east, and they actually ended up in an area in New Jersey to set up another colony. It's called today, obviously called, Remember, originally called it New Ark because it was an ark. They were setting sail on a new course. It's Newark, New Jersey today. So actually, these people were the founders of Newark, New Jersey. I mean, these people were really tentacled out. But I don't know all the history here, but Treat and Payne and Pierce eventually came back into the Connecticut Valley. I don't know the whole history, what happened there. But this is where you start to tie into Michael Payne and Dorothy Pearson. See, they went to New Jersey, and they established themselves in New Jersey. Okay, and they were early landholders of New Jersey. They owned 12 miles of pristine beach along the Atlantic Jersey ocean shore of New Jersey. They're very wealthy. They go back to the early days, so they were part of the early land grab. And Robert Treat. Now, I don't know if they ever married. They probably did marry. I haven't done that genealogy, but we'll go to the city of Boston. And the Payne, Paine, are Boston Brahmins. All right. Now, there's a man. Yeah, that's music's been added in courtesy of the neighborhood. But all I'm trying to say is, there was a man going back to the history, 1776, Robert Treat Payne, Paine, who was one of the signatories to the Declaration of Independence. Yeah, Michael Payne is a direct descendant of a person who signed the Declaration of Independence. Now, Ruth Payne and Michael Payne provided Oswald a safe house on the eve of the Kennedy assassination. And the reason I'm bringing this out is because the history that ties Abraham Pearson and his father and Robert Treat Payne all tied to this history of this university and these families. So their names are all in Warren Commission documents. And see how they're connected in history? Big time. And like I say, Michael Payne and his wife provided Oswald with a safe house on the eve of the JFK assassination where guns were stored. They were preparing Oswald for the Kennedy assassination. And Ruth Payne, Michael's. Now, they were somewhat estranged. Michael was living in another address that time, but they were visiting. According to records, Michael was frequently visiting, and so was Oswald. See, Oswald's wife lived in the Payne residence with her daughters for an extended period of time. And though they were there probably the day Kennedy was shot, or very close. They were living in the Payne house, Ruth and Michael Payne's house. Ruth and Mike were somewhat estranged, but he was often visiting on weekends. And so was Lee Oswald. As per Warren Commission documents and testimonies and stuff, they were frequently coming to the house. So, yeah, they might have been estranged. But actually, after JFK was assassinated, they supposedly got back together again. Maybe for the good of keeping secret. Yeah, that's how they tie in. Abraham Pearson and Robert Treat Payne tied to Michael Payne and Ruth Payne. Oh, by the way, Ruth Payne got Oswald's job at the Texas TSBD, Texas School Book Depository. Is that another coincidence? Now, nothing's a coincidence, but Oswald wanted attention. That's the only coincidence. And that's how they're above the law. You're never going to hold these people, these elites, accountable. That's what happened. Now, there's also another Ruth in this story, and it actually is Ruth Forbes Payne Young. It's another Payne, and it's spelled P-A-I-N, and they are related to Michael Payne. Going back to 1776, they're Boston Brahmins. Ruth Forbes Payne Young was actually the mother of Michael Payne. Ruth Forbes, not to be confused with Ruth, I'm getting a little confused myself. Ruth Paine and Michael Paine were husband and wife. Ruth Paine Forbes Young, yeah, they are related because that was Ruth Forbes Paine Young was Michael Paine's mother. Not to be used with Ruth Paine, who was Michael Paine's wife. They're two different ladies. And Ruth Forbes Paine Young is a Forbes. She was a Forbes. She's cousins to Michael Paine is actually fifth cousins to John Forbes Carey, of course, Skull and Bones. See, is that another coincidence? I told you Skull and Bones helped Rockefellers kill JFK with George Bush. You say, so you see how they're all interlinked and interconnected, and they come back to this Pearson right here at Yale University? They're related. And the Paine is the Paines from they were Boston Brahmins because of Robert Treat Paine and Robert Treat. A lot of history there. It's 4 centuries of it easily. But I wanted to go over that with you. So many of the people mentioned in Water testimony, I'm talking about commission documents, come back to this university. Why? Because of Skull and Bones. But then again, how many buildings have I showed you on this campus that are really connected to Rockefellers? The biggest buildings, the most prominent monuments tied to people, money and everything were tied to Standard Oil and the Rockefellers, like Harkness Tower and Steve Schwartzman and I don't know if I showed you the Sterling Library. I got to go show you the Sterling Library building. Yeah, I got to show you that one too. That's also ties to Rockefeller. So yeah, they're all interconnected here. This is the octopus, the Rockefeller octopus at work here, one of the many tentacles. Okay, I'm going to show you the Sterling Library. I don't know if you can see this huge building here. Not the best position on it. It's probably the biggest building on the campus, the Yale campus. And it ties to Rockefeller, as naturally all the biggest buildings do, but it's called the John W. Sterling Library. And it has a history with books. It also contains a copy of the Gutenberg Bible. And also it was home now. John W. Sterling was a lawyer for Rockefeller and Standard Oil. He made a fortune representing them. And who knows? You know, as lawyers, they defend. See, as lawyers, they defend the Rockefellers from their crimes. So they'll reward them. You know, they keep the Rockefellers from prison and going to the gallows. So they reward their lawyers handsomely, as long as they can preserve their freedom and justice, keep them from the hand of justice. So they left $15 million to Harvard way back when. Not Harvard, I'm sorry, Yale. And they built this. He was also, of course, he was Skull and Bones. But he was also a member of an organization called, you know, I can't think of it now. But they're connected with, one of the things they do is they collect and own manuscripts. The Book Society or something like that. And that's why there's a library in there. It's another one of Yale's fraternal orders. I don't know if it's a secret society, or it probably is. And I'm sorry, the name slips me now. But something like the books. Oh, I know. Brothers United. That's the name of it. It's Brothers United, and they champion the cause of preserving historical documents, which is a good thing. But they always have a dark side associated with them. So anyways, John W. Sterling. There's his name is also in other buildings around here. He had no heirs. He never married, never had children. And John W. Sterling, he was Rockefeller's lawyer, the lawyer for Standard Oil, so he kept those people out of trouble, kept them away from the hand of justice. And he was Skull and Bones. There's also a member of an organization, a fraternity called Brothers United, which is another fraternal organization here at Yale. I don't know much about it. And they do preserve books. They do have a copy. They own a copy of the Gutenberg Bible, which it could be in this building, or there's other buildings around here where they preserve ancient documents. So I've been in that building, and you go inside, it looks like a cathedral on the inside. But you know, there's not many churches around here in Yale University. They look like churches, but they're not. You won't find one cross around here, and you won't find one American flag. You see any American flags on those buildings? Nope, none. I don't know if you can find one in the city. But anyways, things have turned woke here. Okay, folks, I'm standing here in front of the Yale Medical School. There it is, Yale Medical School. And this wing of it is the big complex here. You probably can't see it, but that sign there, this is all divided up. It's the Sterling Hall of Medicine. Yeah, Sterling Hall of Medicine. Yeah, see here, you can see it on the wall. I don't know if you can see it. Sterling Hall of Medicine, Institute of Human Relations, and the Sterling, I don't know if you can see it, Sterling Medical. Now, we've encountered that name earlier. That Sterling name, it's Sterling Library. Now, Sterling ran a law firm, a New York City law firm that represented John Rockefeller and Standard Oil. See how it all... Now, if you go in there, there's a library called the Harvey Cushing / John Hay Whitney Library. Now, I believe that John Hay Whitney conspired with JFK conspired with Nelson Rockefeller to kill JFK. Well, you see, now, medical records, see, in other words, Yale University and these people, they have all our medical information, and who knows what they're using it for. They're trying to they want to create a, they want to deed over our sovereignty to the UN / World Health Organization, so we have to surrender our sovereignty to these organizations. That's their plan. So they're amassing data on people, medical data. So if there's a pandemic or something, they got an excuse to exert higher authority. And I don't want to get a lot of people on this camera. That's what I'm going to point up. Now, we talked about Sterling, right? The Sterling before, John W. Sterling, okay? He worked for Standard. He was a lawyer for Rockefeller and Standard Oil. He kept the Rockefellers from going to prison for their crimes. That's what lawyers do. But I want to talk about Harvey Cushing and John Hay Whitney. Now, Harvey Cushing, I believe, ties to MK Ultra, which I believe Oswald was part of MK Ultra. Now, Cushing died in 1939. All right. Now, his daughter, he had 3 daughters. They're famously married. They married multiple times to very wealthy, famous men. And John Hay Whitney married Betsy Cushing. And she was married to James Roosevelt, who was FDR's son. And James Roosevelt was a deadbeat dad. He was married multiple times. And I'll try to just focus on this sign here. Stay focused on this little sign here. Yale Medical. Okay. Now Betsy Cushing divorced James Roosevelt and married John Hay Whitney, who was the richest man in the world just about. And John Hay adopted FDR's grandchildren. So FDR's grandchildren heirs the Standard Oil fortunes. I told you how the Whitneys connect with Standard Oil through Colonel Oliver Payne, Payne. Now, so Harvey Cushing, one of his daughters married Vincent. I'm getting a little tired after 8 hours of filming. Vincent Astor, who was very close to Nelson Rockefeller, and he was the guy who was listening on. The Roosevelt Astor spying. They were listening on telephone conversations and telegrams in the run up to World War II. And they're probably still doing. That's kind of what the National Security Council is all about: listening on our phone conversations and our communications. They can listen on us, but we can't listen to them. And the other daughter, Babe, they call her Babe Cushing. She was married to another one of Nelson Rockefeller's best buds, Bill Paley, who was the founder of CBS, which is Rockefeller Center. So he was Nelson, and they were all connected with MoMA. Betsy Whitney, John Hay Whitney, um, Bill Paley. They were all connected to the history of the Museum of Modern Art, which was founded by the Rockefellers. They tore down their the Rockefellers tore down their 9-story mansion to build the part of MoMA. It's the back part there would have the garden. That was the Rockefeller home, Manhattan home. But I want to tell you how Harvey Cushing ties to MK Ultra and Assas. I believe Assas was part of MK Ultra. No, he died in 30, but he trained a lot of physicians. They were neurologists. They were toying with the human brain, doing raw science research that were being turned over to MK Ultra experiments, I believe. And one of his understudies was a man named Weiler Penfield. Now, I just learned his name a few months ago. After 40 years of research, I just bumped into his name and his connection with David Rockefeller, and Rockefeller was being financed by the Rockefeller Foundation. And he was like the head guy at McGill University. He was the head of the school of I'm sorry, I'm slipping on that one. Psychiatry. The School of Psychiatry at McGill University, which ran what? Which ran the Allen Institute, which did the experiments, the MK Ultra experiments, famously run by Sidney Gottlieb up there, all under this. Wilder Penfield ran a huge institution up there. It was all being financed by the Rockefellers. It was all psychological research, and they were doing. The Allen Institute was doing outpatient treatment. Okay, for psychological disorders, and the Rockefellers were lacing these people with LSD. They were lacing these people with LSD. And they didn't know. And they were carrying out brain torture on them. It was very painful experiments. And this is the kind of people the Rockefellers are, and these people. So, Weiler Penfield studied under Harvey Cushing, whose daughter married John Hay Whitney, and they have a medical records library in there, the Cushing-Whitney Library, and they're keeping track of our medical information, and I believe to dole over our sovereignty to the UN and World Health Organization. If a pandemic ever breaks out again, they'll claim authority over us, so we surrender our Bill of Rights. Basically, that's my belief. So that's kind of why I wanted to bring here. And you see how it's all tied to Rockefeller? See Sterling Hall. You can actually see that sign over there. It says Sterling Hall, but I don't think you're going to be able to read it. You can't see it. It's blacked out. But it's Sterling Hall Medicine. Now, Sterling is John W. Sterling. I took you to the Sterling Memorial Library, and he was a member of Skull and Bones. He was also a member of the Brothers United, who would claim some kind of a stewardship over ancient documents, including they own a copy of the Bible. And you know what I'm talking about. The name slips me right now. Gutenberg Bible. I got to remember a lot of names. That's how carrying this heavy camera out here in this hot sun. But I do it for you people. I do it for you people so you can see the truth. So Sterling had a law firm, Sherman, Seaman, and Sterling, that represented Stannard and Rockefellers. See, so they all tie back to John D. See, and the Whitneys, of course, were heirs of Stannard Oil Fortunes, who Colonel Oliver Payne, who was one of the original co-founders of Stannard Oil Rockefeller. Okay, there it is, the shuttle bus. And I wanted to show you this. And I wanted to show you how Cushing ties MK Ultra to Wilder Penfield, who was close with David Rockefeller, and they used the Rockefeller Foundation to finance the School of Psychological Research. Now, this is not a secret. If you go to their websites, they own up to this. Over a century, they own up to this stuff. They're not trying to hide this stuff. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about their history with MK Ultra and the Allen Institute. I've been there many times. I've done many videos of them. They were doing diabolical spirits, LSD. People were going in for treatment, and they were being laced with LSD and mind control. These are not nice people, folks. Now, Oswald was never there, but he was part of the greater MK Ultra program started by the Rockefellers, I believe, in 1951, but that's another story. And they were programming Manchurian candidates like Oswald and Sirhan and Squeaky Fromm. Don't forget, Squeaky Fromm almost made Nelson Rockefeller president of the United States. She had a loaded 45, 10 inches from President Ford's heart, loaded. She failed to pull the trigger. Well, Sidney Gottlieb said there was a lot of kinks in the system. And they kind of work around the kinks. So then they brought in another person that took 2 shots at Gerald Ford. But by then they had moved the crowds way back. See, when she came in, when the second assassin came in, they had the Secret Service decided to do their job, and they moved the crowds back from Ford. See, when Squeaky Fromm, Manson family, see, what was Manson family about? LSD, mind control LSD. You know, Manson never directly killed anybody. He ordered people to kill. See? And that's what MK Ultra was about, to order people to kill, and these people would know there'd be no way of tracing back who gave the order. Okay, it took a long time it was over a year long time before they came to Charles Manson and solving those crimes. So you can see how difficult they were to get to. And that's by plan. And of course, Sirhan was definitely part of it. He was on some kind of LSD hypnosis. So you can see this is, I'm just giving you a view of this college. This is their medical area. It's massive. Yale Medical Schools. And J.P. Morgan was a big donor to these medical schools, these Yale medical schools. You know why? Because he's a Pierpont. And this Yale was co-founded by who? James Pierpont and Abraham Pearson. And they've really expanded. I'm sure they got some dedication to J.P. Morgan here. But anyways, okay, I think I'm going to conclude my tour of Yale University. It's been a great 2 days. It's been tremendously rewarding and just overpowering and just such a wow factor. But it goes back to what I'm trying to tell you, how the centers of wealth and power killed JFK. Okay then, bye.